Good evening, Columbus. My name is Stephanie Blank, and I chair Governor Deal's Commission on Child Welfare Reform. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person with you this evening, but I'm so glad that you are joining us to learn more about child welfare and what we can do to better protect our children. In the last legislative session, we introduced Senate Bill 138, which passed through both the House and Senate with almost unanimous support. Some of the highlights of that bill that will impact your children in your community are the fact that our director, Bobby Cagle, now reports directly to the governor. We are also in the process of creating a child abuse registry, which will go into effect in the summer of 2016. This will allow anyone who is in the process of hiring folks to take care of our children to access information about whether or not that's an appropriate hire. We will be protecting our citizens' privacy in this matter, but you as an employer can be assured that your children are safe with anyone that you hire. Some other highlights are around data sharing. We want to make sure that no child ever falls through the cracks because appropriate folks involved in that child's life did not know that they could share information to keep the children safe. So school systems, medical systems, our Department of Ed, our Department of Early Care and Learning, along with our Department of Family and Children's Services, will all be able to interface with each other so that we get a full and clear picture of what is actually going on in that child's life so we know when to appropriately intervene and keep them safe. Those are some of the highlights. If you want to see more information about the full implement that came with Senate Bill 138, you can go to the governor's website. There is a drop-down box called Child Welfare Commission that highlights in detail all the work that we did last year. I'm also pleased to say that in this upcoming year, we will continue the work of the commission. In fact, we just started recently. There are two main issues that we will focus on in this upcoming legislative session. One is the support of our foster families. We have a huge shortage of foster families in the state of Georgia. We want to understand what we can better do to recruit and retain our foster families so that our children have safe and healthy places to go to. We also want to look at the mental health crisis that is affecting our children as early as age 2 and 3 in this state. When children have been the victims of abuse and neglect, they suffer trauma. And that trauma can result in mental health issues that have to be addressed in order for our children to go on and be successful and healthy students and eventually adults who are functioning in our system as well. So those are a few of the highlights. And right now, what I was hoping to share with you is why I am so personally involved with this issue around child abuse and neglect. We often don't think beyond the immediate physical effects of child abuse and neglect, but long-term child abuse and neglect, and I keep saying neglect because neglect can be as impactful on a child's development as a one-time incident of physical abuse. But what happens to a child when they are experiencing abuse and neglect? It may be happening to them, their own bodies, or they may be witnessing it as well. They may be seeing mom, the victim of domestic violence. But when that is occurring repeatedly over time, it creates tremendous stress in the child's system. We all experience stress. As you will see on the slide, there's this thing called positive stress, and that can come when you're going to a new school, you may be getting a new job, moving into a new house. It's very short term, you learn how to adjust to it, and you move on with your life. There's also something called tolerable stress. It's more serious. It may occur because a loved one has died. Mom or dad might lose a job. It may mean moving to an entirely new city. This stress is a little more impactful and may last a little longer, but when it's buffered by a loving and caring adult, our children emerge from that stronger and wiser and more resilient. But the third kind of stress, the one that I want to really stress today, no pun intended, is one called toxic stress. And toxic stress occurs when the problems that the children are facing are unrelieved, They have no control over them. They are extremely serious in nature, and it is a constant and ever-present part of their life every day. It can come from physical abuse and neglect. It can come from food insecurities, not knowing from day to day where they may be living. It may come from witnessing, as I mentioned earlier, domestic violence within the home. It can also come from seeing their caregiver the victim of substance abuse as well. There are a variety of things that can cause this level of stress in a child's life, and oftentimes these factors are all coming together at once. But when that happens, and when a child reaches this level of toxic stress, there are some, unfortunately, long-lasting things that can happen to the architecture of the brain. As you'll see on the next slide, there are neurons in the brain. These neurons form what are called synaptic connections. It's basically kind of the pathway through which all information is transmitted through the brain. It helps lay the groundwork for how our entire brain functions. And in an infant, that happens about 700 times every single second. It is an amazing network, but it has to be at full, optimal functioning in order for that child's brain to develop the way it should. So where does toxic stress fit in with this? When the body is in this state of toxic stress, it is constantly being bathed with chemicals, cortisol, adrenaline. There's a whole kind of cocktail, if you will, of chemicals that are bathing the brain in this developing child. And unfortunately, this cocktail is detrimental to the growth of neurons. As you will see on the other part of the slide, you can look at the healthy neuron on the top and see all of the pieces that are coming together on that neuron. The damaged one below has far fewer pieces. This can actually impact not only the cognitive development of our children, but their actual IQ. And furthermore, one of the more troubling aspects of this is we know it impacts their social and emotional growth. How they react to other human beings, their ability to trust, to love, to accurately assess human intention can all be damaged by repeated exposure to toxic stress in their lives. It is one of the single most important aspects of the work of child welfare, is addressing this issue of how do we not only protect our children from the effects, the immediate effects of the physical damage that is sometimes done, but the long-term effects that come with exposure to trauma and the toxic stress that ensues afterwards. So why does this matter to all of us as a community? Well, these children will eventually, if they're young enough, they will go on to school. They will enter into our elementary schools, our middle schools, our high schools, and then they will enter into adulthood. But what happens to these children if this is unrelieved? If you look at the next chart, you will see that development in the first 3 years that has been significantly impaired by toxic stress affects their overall development. So the chart I'm showing you is from something called ACE. It stands for Adverse Child Experiences. And the more adverse experiences that a child has, and it comes from, again, abuse, neglect, food insecurity, housing insecurity, domestic violence, drug and alcohol abuse, the more that that child experiences those risk factors, the greater their chance of developing a developmental delay. In fact, when the risks number gets over 5, more than half of those children will develop a delay. This impacts our school system greatly, but it also affects our juvenile justice system. It affects teen pregnancy rates, substance abuse issues, a whole litany of woes for our children, all of because what happened in those first 3 years. So it is important that we as a community pay attention to how we can help make our children whole, how we can address these issues, how we can bring together what are often viewed as disparate parts of our community to come together to address this through early childhood education centers, through our faith-based community, through our Department of Education, and through our healthcare community. If we all come together around these issues, we will begin to make an impact on the victims, our youngest victims of child abuse and neglect. They all deserve the chance to grow up healthy and strong in every way possible. And with your help and your community's involvement, we can make that difference. Thank you.